Welcome to Ha Tonka State Park. It's one of the jewels of the Missouri State Park system. My name is Nancy Masterson. I'm Park Superintendent. Some of you have visited here before, and maybe we can share with you today some things you haven't seen before. And for others, it will be a first-time visit, and there are so many things for you to see here and enjoy. Ha Tonka became a state park in 1979 and joined the park system then with really minimal facilities. And since that time, we've been developing more and more things for people to enjoy, more trails, more facilities like picnic shelters that can be rented. Just a wonderful place to come and visit. Ozark folklore is how I like to say it, is that the Indians called this area Ha Tonka. Now, when we really research that, we don't really find those words in the Osage language, although we find words like Tonka, meaning the Great One, the Great Spirit, and a lot of other guttural sounds that sound a lot like ha, wah. And so eventually people heard the Indians talking and decided that what they were calling this area was Ha Tonka. Well, you probably are going to come to Ha Tonka because you've heard about the old castle building, but really there's so many interesting geologic features and wonderful landscape that's just a great diversity of plants that were here when the first settlers came to Missouri. But your first stop should be here at the Visitor Center. We have an interesting assortment of postcards that you can take home, or books about features here in the park or the area. When this Visitor Center was built in the late 1990s, it was decided to place a large scale model of the park's terrain on the floor. Around that is surrounded 6 exhibit texts that tell you about the main themes here at the park. Whether it be the story of the old castle building, which you may see on the wall behind me at the top, or it could be the geologic features or the interesting features here because of the rock, the landscapes, the water. All of these are themes here at Ha Tonka, and they're all interpreted for you here and then elsewhere in the park after you go to enjoy those features. This is a sinkhole that we're in, and as we traveled down here this morning to take these shots, we noticed a difference in temperature between the upper area of the sinkhole and the area we're in right now. I actually had one of my performance reviews. We didn't have anything air conditioned at the time. This was when I first came to the park in the early 80s. I said, let's go sit down on the steps at the cave. And this is what we did. We came down here and sat, and I had my yearly evaluation. It was wonderful because it was the coolest place in the park in July. This sinkhole is rather unique because it has a cave opening at the bottom behind me. Now, it's gated and graded to keep human interaction out of the cave system right now. Mostly right now because of the threat of white nose syndrome, which is harming bat populations across the United States. There's a good exhibit here in the park on how water influences the landscape, how these sinkholes are formed, how slowly what we suppose, and as you pointed out, there's evidence of large boulders here scattered around us. Many of those are covered now with soil and debris, leaf debris and branches, and so we really don't see all of it. But in some places along the spring trail, we see again pieces of big boulder. In the Coliseum, we see pieces of big boulder that are still evident. Those were all pieces of the ceiling, the roof of this cave room. Water above ground is erosive and eventually weakens these ceilings, and we don't know why it chooses particular pieces of ceiling, but for some reason maybe these ceilings were fractured, allowing water to get down into them, freezing and thawing, and eventually cracks them enough that at some point maybe an earth shaking has caused this ceiling to collapse and fall in, leaving other pieces intact. And that's what we have at the Natural Bridge. We have a sinkhole on both sides of a natural rock arch that still remains. That was part of the cave that didn't collapse, but the pieces on either side did. When we were able to, in past years, give guided tours into the park, we could identify a lot of those things that you might walk right by and not realize is in the water, but are there. And even we have blind cave fish have been noted in this cave, which is another state listed watch species. But in these sinkholes, they're such protected environments that the vegetation here usually is very lush and stays green all year because it's a very moist, cool environment, and these rock walls trap that coolness and that moisture. And so as you can see, you know, plants thrive even on the rock wall behind us. Well, we've now traveled to the lake area portion of the park, and you know, you could spend more than a day here exploring all the different areas, but this is a very interesting area, and actually visitors to the park can come by boats. We have 2 courtesy docks. We're on the 15-mile of the Big Niangua arm of Lake of the Ozarks. Well, we've traveled down the boardwalk now to this spring. You can see that behind me. 48 millions of water, and that's just an average, 48 million gallons of water a day flows out of this spring. We've dry traced water between here and Lebanon, so we know that the recharge area for this spring is quite large, and mostly rural and undeveloped or agricultural land, which probably helps it maintain its cleanliness. It's very cool in this area of the park, and so in the summertime that's most welcome. But even in the winter months, when even the water in the lake is freezing, this water doesn't freeze because as it's leaving the earth, it has a temperature of 55 degrees, and that's year-round. You always have to be careful of a spring because you don't know what has entered the groundwater before it comes here. If you're lucky and you're quiet, it's a peaceful time of the day, you may see some of those. Muskrat, beaver, we've seen otter back in here. Ducks love this environment. You'll see a northern water snake, perhaps sunning on a branch next to the water or maybe swimming away from you. We'll spot fish in the water occasionally, although we don't make any effort to stock it, but the fish migrate from the lake back up into here. We've made it up to the site of Ha Tonka Castle, really a cultural oddity located here in the Ozarks. Mr. Schneider, who had the dream to build this house on top of the bluff, was a rich Kansas City businessman. He envisioned a stone home, the stone quarried here on the property. The lumber used in the house was all cut and sawmilled here on the property. He hired local men to do the work, but to ensure that European authenticity of the castles he had often visited in Europe, his architect designed the home, but he had European stonemasons come over. Today, we are able to enjoy this and maybe do a little of the dreaming that Mr. Schneider had in his mind when he built it. And although we only have stark walls today, we can just imagine and fill in the rooms with the furniture in our minds and just think about how wonderful this would have been in its heyday. Well, if this short piece has been intriguing to you and you want to come visit the park, we're located about 5 miles southwest of Camdenton on West Highway 54. Highway D is the road you will turn off to come to the park. The first building you'll hit is that visitor center that we showed you earlier in the piece. If you want to call to make sure we're open, that number is 573-346-2986. But we are open 365 days of the year. There's not always staff on duty or staff available to open the office or give a hike, but the park is always open, with the exception of when the roads are ice or snow covered. Then we have to limit you for your own safety. But come enjoy the park any time of the year. It's really beautiful year-round.